April 10th, 2023, Scorton Avenue, Blackpool. Police officers arrive at a ground-floor flat just after 7 in the evening. Inside, they find a man slumped on the sofa, battered, bruised, his face swollen from what's clearly been a violent assault. His name is John Hutchinson. The officers ask if he needs medical attention. He refuses. They ask who did this to him. He won't say. No descriptions, no names, nothing. With no cooperation and no evidence to work with, the officers have no choice but to leave. 90 minutes later, the same flat, the same man. But this time, paramedics are rushing through the door. John Hutchinson has gone into cardiac arrest. He's rushed to hospital in critical condition, but it's already too late. He dies shortly after arrival. So what happened in those 90 minutes? And why did the men responsible think they'd walked away clean? The answer lies in a group chat, a series of messages sent between the attackers just hours after the assault. Messages that were meant to stay private, but instead became the evidence that would unravel everything. But before we get to that group chat, we need to go back 10 hours to a different address and a very different victim. Welcome to UK True Crime Files. Early hours of April 10th, 2023, Tarnbrook Drive, Blackpool. Daniel Cunningham is asleep in his home when he's woken by the sound of breaking glass. Before he can react, 3 masked men are inside, armed with hammers, faces covered, moving fast. They know exactly what they're looking for. Cunningham is a drug dealer, not a major player, but established enough to have cash and product in the house. The intruders force him and his wife into a room, demand the stash. Cunningham hands it over. Drugs, cash, everything. The men take what they came for and leave. The whole thing is over in minutes. His wife immediately calls the police. Officers arrive to take statements, but Cunningham refuses to cooperate. He won't identify the attackers, won't describe what was taken, won't press charges. To the officers, this is frustratingly familiar. In Blackpool's criminal underworld, cooperation with police is seen as a weakness, a violation of the street code. Victims of crime often refuse help because they plan to handle things themselves. And Cunningham already knows how he's going to handle this, because he did recognize one of the robbers, not from the masks or the voices, but from the way he moved, the build, the height. Cunningham is certain he knows who orchestrated the robbery. His name is John Hutchinson. Hutchinson is a low-level dealer who's been making a name for himself by doing exactly this: taxing other dealers, robbing their stashes, using the proceeds to grow his own operation. It's a high-risk strategy, but up until now, it's worked. So within hours of being robbed, Cunningham's already made his choice. Silence with the police, action on the streets. But he's not going to confront Hutchinson himself. He's going to call someone who specializes in solving problems like this. Someone from Merseyside with a reputation for extreme violence. The man he called wasn't just a supplier. He was someone with a reputation for solving problems violently. If you're new here, we cover UK cases with verified facts and courtroom evidence. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The man Cunningham calls is Lee Clark. Clark operates out of Merseyside, a Class A drug supplier with connections across the northwest. But he's not just known for what he sells. He's known for how he handles disputes. Previous convictions, a history of violence, and a willingness to cross county lines to protect his business interests. When Cunningham tells him about the robbery, Clark doesn't hesitate. This isn't just about recovering the drugs, it's about sending a message. If word gets out that one of Clark's associates was robbed without consequences, it damages both their reputations. Cunningham gives Clark the name, John Hutchinson. Small-time Blackpool dealer, mid-30s, taxing rivals to fund his own operation. He's been getting away with it because most of his victims won't go to the police and won't retaliate. But Hutchinson's made a miscalculation this time. He's robbed someone connected to Merseyside muscle. Clark makes another call to David Bond, a Liverpool enforcer who's worked with him before. Bond agrees to come. The plan is straightforward. Find Hutchinson, recover the stash, teach him a lesson he won't forget. But first, they need to know where he is. Enter Darren McCabe. McCabe is a local Blackpool addict, a regular customer of Cunningham's who survives by doing odd jobs for dealers. He's manic, erratic, and desperate for his next fix. But he's also useful because he knows people, knows addresses, and can move around the town without raising suspicion. Cunningham offers McCabe £200 to locate Hutchinson. It's easy money for someone in McCabe's position, and he accepts immediately. What McCabe does next is reckless, even by his standards. He goes straight to an address where Hutchinson's girlfriend is staying, and when she answers the door, McCabe doesn't play it subtle. He's agitated, wired, talking fast. He pulls out a knife, not to threaten her directly, but to make sure she understands the seriousness of what he's saying. Tell Hutchie the Scousers are coming for him. He'll be a dead man soon. The girlfriend slams the door and immediately calls Hutchinson. He's not at her flat. He's already elsewhere, but the warning sends him into hiding. He moves to a friend's place on Scorton Avenue, a ground-floor flat where he thinks he'll be safe. But McCabe's already confirmed the location. Word goes back to Cunningham. The message is clear: target acquired. So now we've got 4 men, 2 cities, and 1 target. And Hutchinson has no idea he's been found. Later that same day, the crew assembles at Cunningham's house on Tarnbrook Drive. Cunningham, Clark, Bond, and McCabe, all in one place, waiting for the right moment. They're not just planning to talk to Hutchinson, they're arming themselves. A metal bar, a wooden pole, a hammer. CCTV later captures them blocks away from Scorton Avenue, moving together, tools in hand. McCabe tracks Hutchinson to a girlfriend's address first, and what he does next sends Hutchinson into hiding. McCabe arrives at the girlfriend's address in the early afternoon, agitated, talking fast, knife visible. The warning he delivers is blunt and terrifying. The Scousers are coming for Hutchie. He'll be a dead man soon. The girlfriend immediately calls Hutchinson. She's panicked, repeating what McCabe said, word for word. Hutchinson knows exactly what this means. He's been in the game long enough to understand that when Merseyside gets involved, threats aren't idle. He leaves wherever he's been staying and moves to a friend's flat on Scorton Avenue, a quiet residential street in Blackpool. It's a ground-floor flat, nothing flashy, the kind of place where he thinks he can lay low until things cool down. But McCabe's already done his job. He's confirmed the location, and that information goes straight back to Cunningham. By late afternoon, the crew is assembled at Cunningham's house on Tarnbrook Drive. Cunningham, Lee Clark, David Bond, and Darren McCabe, all in one room, planning the next move. This isn't about negotiation, it's about recovery and retribution. The drugs Hutchinson stole are worth between £21,000 and £40,000. But more than that, Cunningham's reputation is on the line. In the criminal underworld, being robbed without consequences is a sign of weakness, and weakness invites more predators. So the plan is simple. Go to Scorton Avenue, force entry, recover the stash, and make sure Hutchinson understands this can never happen again. They arm themselves: a metal bar, a wooden pole, a claw hammer. McCabe will stay in the car, acting as lookout and getaway driver. The others will go inside. CCTV later places them on nearby streets in the late afternoon, moving together, tools concealed but visible to cameras. At the time, no one knows what's about to happen. Just 4 men walking through Blackpool on an April evening. Hutchinson thinks he's hidden, but in Blackpool's underworld, being the victim of a robbery isn't just a loss, it's a humiliation, and Cunningham's reputation is on the line. At 6 p.m. on April 10th, Less than 14 hours after the original robbery, they make their move. 6 p.m, Scorton Avenue. The grey Ford Fiesta pulls up outside the ground floor flat. McCabe stays in the driver's seat, engine running, eyes on the street. Cunningham, Clark and Bond approach the door. They don't knock. Bond smashes the window with the claw hammer. Glass shatters inward. Within seconds, they're forcing their way inside. John Hutchinson is in the flat with a friend. Both freeze. There's no time to run, no time to lock themselves in another room. The three men are already inside, and they've come prepared. David Bond grabs Hutchinson and drags him to the floor. The hammer comes down, striking him across the back. Hutchinson tries to cover his head, tries to curl up, but the blows keep coming. Bond uses his feet now, stomping, kicking. The others join in. The metal bar, the wooden pole, fists. It's not a fight, it's a beating. Under the assault, Hutchinson gives up what they came for. He tells them where the drugs are, the stash he took from Cunningham's house that morning. Between £21,000 and £40,000 worth of Class A substances. They take it. Mission accomplished. The attack stops. Cunningham, Clark and Bond leave the flat, walk back to the car and drive away. From their perspective, the job is done. Message sent. Reputation restored. But a neighbour has already called the police. Officers arrive at Scorton Avenue shortly after 7 p.m, less than an hour after the assault. They find Hutchinson slumped on the sofa, battered and bruised. His face is swollen, his breathing is laboured. There's visible trauma across his body. The officers ask if he needs medical attention. Hutchinson refuses. They ask who did this to him, how many attackers, what they looked like, why they came. Hutchinson won't say. No descriptions, no names, nothing. It's the same street code that kept Cunningham from cooperating earlier that morning. Even now, beaten, injured, struggling to breathe, Hutchinson refuses to help the police. With no cooperation and no immediate evidence, the officers have little choice but to leave. They file a report. They note the refusal of medical assistance and they move on. So for the second time that day, John Hutchinson refuses to help the police. But this time, it's because he's already dying. What the officers didn't know, what Hutchinson himself might not have realized, is that internally, he was bleeding out. This case turns on what happened next, the digital evidence that exposed everything. If you want to see how investigators pieced it together, stay with us. John Hutchinson's injuries were catastrophic. The hammer blow to his back had fractured a rib, and that fractured rib had ruptured his spleen. Internally, he was bleeding out. Massive hemorrhaging that his body couldn't compensate for. At 9:10 p.m, just over 2 hours after the police first left, emergency services are called back to the flat. This time, it's not just officers. Paramedics rush inside to find Hutchinson in cardiac arrest. They work on him at the scene, then transport him to hospital under emergency conditions. But the damage is too severe. John Hutchinson is pronounced dead shortly after arrival. What began as an assault is now a murder investigation. Lancashire police immediately escalate. Detectives are assigned. CCTV is pulled from the surrounding streets. Witnesses are interviewed. The neighbour who called 999 describes seeing men leave the flat. Hutchinson's friend, who was present during the attack, is too traumatized to give detailed descriptions, but confirms there were multiple attackers. The investigation moves fast, but what the police don't know yet is that the killers are already creating their own evidence trail. Because while investigators are securing the scene, the four men responsible are messaging each other. The group chat starts just hours after the assault. David Bond is the first to complain. "Lads, my foot's killing me." It's almost casual, like he's talking about a football injury. Lee Clark responds in the same tone. "Took me back to the good old days, that did." There's no remorse, no concern. If anything, there's nostalgia, like they've just finished a job well done. Bond continues, "My bird's fuming with me. I told her I only drove the car." It's ironic, because Bond didn't drive. He was the one who wielded the hammer, the one who dragged Hutchinson to the floor and struck the fatal blow. But in his own mind, he's already rewriting the story, distancing himself from the violence. Daniel Cunningham joins the chat. "Thanks, brother, for everything." It's a message of gratitude, a debt repaid. From Cunningham's perspective, justice has been served. His drugs are back. His reputation is intact. Hutchinson has been dealt with. But then news of Hutchinson's death starts to spread. The tone of the group chat shifts immediately. Bond's bravado evaporates. He sends a message to Clark, panicked. "What if I did it? What if that was me?" Clark tries to reassure him. "A hammer to the back ain't doing that, bro. Don't stress." It's meant to calm Bond down, but it reveals something critical. Clark knows exactly where the hammer struck. He knows what weapon was used and where it landed, and he's convinced that a blow to the back couldn't have been fatal. But the autopsy will prove him wrong, because the hammer blow to the back, the one Clark dismissed, the one Bond is now panicking about, that's exactly what killed John Hutchinson. The fractured rib, the ruptured spleen, the internal bleeding, all caused by that single strike. So the very weapon Bond thought was harmless, the very blow Clark dismissed, that's what killed John Hutchinson. And all of this, the jokes, the panic, the attempted cover-up, was sitting in a digital trail that investigators were about to uncover. April 11th, 2025, 1:15 p.m. Less than 24 hours after John Hutchinson's death, police arrive at Daniel Cunningham's home on Tarnbrook Drive. He's in the middle of a phone call with Lee Clark when officers knock on the door. Cunningham is arrested on suspicion of murder. At the exact moment of his arrest, detectives are listening, because Cunningham's phone is already being monitored, and that conversation with Clark is being recorded in real time. It's not just Cunningham they're closing in on. Clark, sensing the danger, reaches out to David Bond with urgent advice. "Launch your phone, bro. Get rid of the hammer." But it's too late. The digital evidence has already been secured. Phone records, message logs, the entire group chat. All of it is now in the hands of Lancashire police. Over the next 4 days, the remaining suspects are arrested one by one. David Bond is picked up on April 15th at his home in Crosby, Merseyside. Lee Clark is arrested in Prescott. Darren McCabe is found in Blackpool. All 4 men are brought in for questioning. Cunningham goes no comment in his interview. He refuses to answer questions, refuses to explain his movements, refuses to acknowledge any involvement. It's a standard tactic, but it does nothing to counter the evidence already stacked against him. Lee Clark takes a different approach. He admits to being present during the assault, but tries to minimize his role. When asked to describe the victim, Clark refers to him as the baldy one. It's a weak deflection. John Hutchinson wasn't bald. The description doesn't match, and investigators know it. Clark is trying to create distance, to suggest confusion, but the group chat messages place him at the scene, celebrating afterward. David Bond stays silent during most of his interview, but the evidence speaks for him. The hammer, the messages, the panic when news of Hutchinson's death spread. Darren McCabe, desperate and unraveling, points the finger at Bond. He tells investigators that Bond was the one who wielded the hammer, the one who struck the fatal blow. McCabe positions himself as a driver, a lookout, trying to separate himself from the violence inside the flat. But legally, it doesn't matter who struck the blow. Under joint enterprise laws in the UK, all participants in a violent crime can be held equally responsible for the outcome, even if only one person delivered the fatal injury. The case goes to trial at Preston Crown Court. The prosecution presents the CCTV footage, the group chat messages, the autopsy report. They lay out the timeline: the robbery, the assembly, the assault, the death. They prove that all 4 men played a role, and that the attack was coordinated, planned, and executed with intent to cause serious harm. The jury deliberates. Mee Clark and David Bond are found guilty of murder. Daniel Cunningham and Darren McCabe are found guilty of manslaughter. On January 16, 2024, all 4 men are sentenced. Lee Clark receives life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years, plus an additional 9 years for drug offences. David Bond is sentenced to life with a minimum of 24 years, plus 6 months for drug-related charges. Daniel Cunningham is given 18 years for manslaughter, with an additional 6 years to run concurrently for handling stolen goods, and 2 years consecutive for drug supply. Darren McCabe, the lookout and facilitator, receives 16 years. No eligibility for parole. 4 men, 4 verdicts, but only 2 were convicted of murder, because proving who struck the fatal blow became central to the case. The group chat that was meant to stay private became the prosecution's most damning evidence. The jokes, the panic, the admissions, all of it presented in court, line by line. What they thought was a private conversation became a public confession. John Hutchinson was 34 years old when he died. He left behind family, friends, loved ones, people who will carry the weight of his death for the rest of their lives. His girlfriend, who received the terrifying warning from Darren McCabe just hours before the assault. The friend who was with him in the flat on Scorton Avenue, forced to watch the attack unfold. The paramedics who tried to save him. The neighbours who heard the commotion and called for help. But Hutchinson's story is complicated. He wasn't just a victim. He was also the perpetrator of the robbery that set all of this in motion. He broke into Daniel Cunningham's home with 2 others, armed with hammers, terrorised Cunningham's wife, and stole tens of thousands of pounds worth of drugs. He built his own operation by taxing other dealers, knowing full well the risks that came with that strategy. That doesn't justify what happened to him. Nothing justifies being beaten to death in a ground-floor flat while refusing medical help out of adherence to a code that ultimately cost him his life. But it does complicate the narrative. This wasn't a case of an innocent bystander caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was the predictable collision of 2 criminal enterprises, both operating outside the law, both willing to use violence, both bound by the same street code that kept them from cooperating with police even when their lives depended on it. For the community around Scorton Avenue, the impact was immediate and traumatic. Residents heard the assault. They saw the police arrive twice. They watched paramedics rush a dying man out of a flat on their street. And they learned, through news reports and court proceedings, that the violence on their doorstep was connected to a drug dispute that had started miles away. Daniel Cunningham's wife witnessed 2 separate violent crimes in a single day. First, masked men breaking into her home in the early hours. Then, later that same day, her husband orchestrating a retaliatory attack that resulted in a man's death. Darren McCabe's landlady overheard him ranting about needing to go after some guy and kill him. She reported it after the fact, but at the time, she had no way of knowing whether it was drug-fueled paranoia or a genuine threat. The legal system treated this case as a clear example of joint enterprise. All 4 men participated. All 4 knew the plan. All 4 armed themselves or facilitated the attack. And when one of them struck a fatal blow, all of them bore responsibility. For Lee Clark, this wasn't his first conviction for serious violence. His criminal history showed a pattern. Someone who didn't just supply drugs, but enforced debts and disputes with extreme force. The sentencing reflected that. For David Bond, the hammer blow to John Hutchinson's back will define the rest of his life. 24 years minimum before he's even eligible for parole. For Daniel Cunningham, The choice to call in Merseyside muscle rather than accept the loss turned a robbery into a murder. 18 years. For Darren McCabe, £200 and the promise of drugs bought him 16 years in prison. But there's a larger question here, one that sits at the heart of this case. What if John Hutchinson had cooperated with police? It's an impossible question to answer, but it's worth considering. When officers arrived at Scorton Avenue just after 7 p.m, Hutchinson was conscious, able to speak, and aware of who had attacked him. He could have identified his assailants. He could have accepted medical attention. But he didn't. The street code, the same code that kept Daniel Cunningham from cooperating earlier that day, meant that seeking help from police was seen as weakness, as betrayal. And so Hutchinson refused. He sent the officers away, and 90 minutes later, he went into cardiac arrest. Would medical intervention have saved his life? Possibly. A ruptured spleen can be treated if caught early enough. But we'll never know, because Hutchinson chose silence over survival. That choice reflects a broader reality in the criminal underworld. Disputes are handled internally. Debts are settled with violence, and cooperation with law enforcement is considered the ultimate transgression. But there's another unresolved element to this case. The 3 masked men who robbed Daniel Cunningham in the early hours of April 10th were never identified. Only John Hutchinson was named. The other 2, if they even existed separately from Hutchinson, were never charged, never arrested, never brought to account. Cunningham claimed he recognized one of the robbers, but did he actually know for certain it was Hutchinson? Or was Hutchinson simply the most convenient target, someone already known for taxing other dealers, someone whose reputation made him an easy suspect? The court accepted that Hutchinson was involved in the robbery. His possession of the stolen drugs supported that conclusion, but the identities of the other participants remain unknown. There's an ethical complexity here that can't be ignored. John Hutchinson made dangerous choices. He robbed other dealers to build his own operation. He knew the risks. He understood that in a world without legal recourse, violence is the primary enforcement mechanism. And when that violence came for him, he refused the one system that might have saved his life. But none of that justifies what happened to him. The response was disproportionate. 4 men, armed with metal bars and hammers, beating a man in his own flat until his spleen ruptured. That's not justice. That's not even effective deterrence. It's rage, reputation management, and retribution taken to a fatal extreme. And the irony is that the very tools meant to coordinate the attack, mobile phones, group chats, digital communication, became the evidence that dismantled their defense. In a case built on silence and street justice, it was their own words that convicted them. What's certain is this: what began as a robbery at dawn became a murder by nightfall, all because reputation mattered more than life. Daniel Cunningham could have absorbed the loss. He could have written off the stolen drugs, increased his security, moved on. But in the criminal underworld he operated in, being robbed without retaliation wasn't just a financial setback. It was an existential threat to his standing. So he called in Lee Clark. And Clark brought David Bond. And Darren McCabe tracked down John Hutchinson for £200 and the promise of his next fix. 4 men, each making a choice, each believing they could control the outcome. But the tools they used to coordinate, the phones, the messages, the group chat, became the very evidence that destroyed them. The jokes sent hours after the attack. The panic when news of Hutchinson's death spread. The advice to launch your phone and get rid of the hammer. All of it captured, preserved, presented in court. In a world built on silence, their own words became their confession. John Hutchinson died, refusing to cooperate with the system that might have saved him. His attackers were convicted using the digital trail they created themselves. and the 2 other men who participated in the original robbery were never identified, leaving an unresolved thread that runs through the entire case. There are no clear heroes in this story, no innocent victims stumbling into tragedy, just a series of choices, robberies, retaliations, refusals, that collided on a quiet Blackpool street in April 2023. Families on both sides lost someone. Hutchinson's loved ones grieve a man taken too soon in a brutal and preventable attack. Cunningham's wife witnessed violence twice in one day, first as a victim, then as a perpetrator's partner. The neighbours on Scorton Avenue carry the memory of paramedics rushing past their windows. McCabe's landlady heard the threat and didn't know if it was real. The sentences handed down, 27 years, 24 years, 18 years, 16 years, are measured in decades. But for the people left behind, the impact is permanent. In the criminal underworld, respect is everything, but chasing it can cost you everything too. If you found this case as complex and troubling as we did, consider subscribing. We cover UK true crime cases with verified facts, courtroom evidence, and respect for everyone involved. Because the truth is rarely simple, and the stories deserve to be told carefully. And if you're from Blackpool and remember April 2023, if this case affected your community or someone you know, feel free to share your thoughts below respectfully. These aren't just headlines, they're lives, families, and neighbourhoods still dealing with the aftermath. Thanks for watching.